Is it? Yeah, it's going. Good morning. Hope everyone had a nice Christmas. We see that we're a little sparse this morning. It could be because of the little bit of snow out there keeping some people a little slower coming in. Hope everybody had a good Christmas. Is there anything we need to pray about this morning? Any prayer requests? Will you bow with me this morning? Father in heaven, we're so grateful for all the blessing you give us. Father, we're thankful for this time we can study your word. We're mindful of Andrew, who's had his heart transplant. Father, we ask that you continue to be with him and the family as he's recovering very nicely. We ask to be with Tracy Perry and her family as they're heading out for the funeral of their Aunt Bonnie. Father, we ask that you comfort and strengthen family there. All these favors and blessings we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Still in the book of Daniel, still in chapter 2. But we're finally getting around to knowing what this dream is. We know that Daniel's roughly an 18-year-old, been imprisoned, been captured, but he's been under the king's guardship for a while. The king is roughly 34, 35 years old. And we know the situation where the king's wise men couldn't interpret and tell Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was. But Daniel is getting to the point where he's going to tell the king what the dream is. We won't recap everything. If you'd like to know, Daniel chapter 2. We're going to start off at verses 31 to 35, and this is Daniel telling Nebuchadnezzar what the dream is that he had. You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue was large and extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer's threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. I could kind of see why Nebuchadnezzar was a little uneasy about this dream, not understanding it, losing sleep, and wondering, what is this? What does it mean? So it could be very unnerving of somebody that's in power, this happens. Usually when we're reading in the Old Testament about statues and idols being built, what are they made out of? Typically gold. Typically all one metal. A lot of times they're large, sometimes they're not as large. This doesn't say how big it was, but it does say it was a single great statue, and it was large, and it was extraordinary splendor. So it looked nice. There was something about it that made it awesome. But it was made out of various metals, which is different. And granted, this was a dream, not a real statue. But idols and statues were typically made of gold, a fine, precious metal that stood there as an awesome thing. But this one was different because it was made of various metals. And Daniel didn't specifically said what Nebuchadnezzar's dream was. Very detailed, from head to foot, of what this dream was about and what this statue was. So it can imply to Nebuchadnezzar that Daniel's God told him what this dream was. Because Daniel said earlier about that. The description of the dream was so thorough and complete that it could only have come from God, not some man making it up like what Nebuchadnezzar was expecting his wise men to do, all those magicians and sorcerers to come up with something. How could somebody come up with a detail of somebody's dream that is that complete and that detail of this huge statue of all these various metals that it's made out of? But it's stated that the king was looking at the statue. So you can see Nebuchadnezzar, somebody that's in power, having a dream that he's looking at this huge statue, a statue he knows nothing about, and he's staring at it. And he's wondering, what is this? This thing is awesome. It's impressive. Not to ruin the rest of Daniel, but in chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar himself builds a statue. He builds one that's 90 foot tall, 9 foot wide. So you can see kind of how he thinks a little bit of what could be an awesome and a big statue. So now going back into chapter 2, a little bit of Nebuchadnezzar's mindset of what he can interpret as awesome and large. The head of it was of gold. Then we go on to silver, bronze, iron. The finest metal was the metal of the head. Then as we continue to go down through the statue, the metals don't become as precious, which is an interesting fact as we go into the interpretation of the dream when Daniel says that further on. The decreasing value of the metals we will see, again, and it's hard when I'm breaking this up into the dream versus the interpretation, but it'll be broken out more in the interpretation of what these various metals are. The head was made of gold. The breast and arms were made of silver. The belly and thighs made of bronze. Very precious metals. Gold is a metal by itself. Silver is a metal by itself. They're elements by themselves. Bronze is made of a couple other elements, made of copper and tin. Then you get into iron. It's an element by itself. But iron is one of the most common elements on earth. So as you go from the head, when you think of a statue or even a being, the head is the most smart, the most powerful part, and as you go down, it becomes of lesser value. Well, the elements are doing the same thing as it goes down from gold to silver to bronze to iron. Then we get down to the feet, which is clay, which is pottery, which is even less value and less precious than what iron is. So that's a complete distinction of what this statue is made of. And it's very important that we see that the legs were of iron, but the feet were of iron and clay, a mixture of the two, something that really won't mix together well. It's hard to get them to blend together and stick together, iron or gold and silver. It's hard to get silver and copper to stick together. It's hard to get iron to stick to gold, silver, or copper. It's pottery will wrap around anything and kind of stick to it, but there's no stability, there's no rigidity, there's no strength in it. And in the interpretation, we will see what all these metals are and the various parts of the statue and what it comes to be. So it's an interesting dream of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar has, that it's in various parts. The body of that statue is broken up in different metals, and we will see what each of those mean in a little bit. I'm telling you a lot, and I keep saying, we'll see it later. We'll see it later. So, hold on. What's that? Stay tuned. Terry?
You keep saying copper. Mine has bronze.
I'm sorry. It is bronze. It is bronze. My mistake. Bronze is made of copper and tin. It is bronze. Okay. My mistake. Thank you. And it says bronze here, highlighted in purple. The belly and thighs are bronze. I'm sorry, I keep saying copper. Right? It's like bronze is made of copper and tin. That's what it is. But yes, it is bronze, not copper. Bronze is a soft metal as well, because it's made of two other soft metals. Value goes down from silver to bronze, but yes, it is bronze. Thank you. As we continue on in verses 34 and 35, as Nebuchadnezzar's looking at the statue, he sees this stone cut out. We don't see where the stone's cut from. We don't see how it's come about, but it says this stone, cut without hands, struck the statue on its weakest part. Later in Daniel, we will see that the stone is taken from a mountain, but it's cut without hands. So it can't be something manly made. It cannot be a manly thing that this stone is, that what's cut out and strikes the statue. And it strikes it on its weakest part. When you see this massive statue, what would you think its weakest part would be? The feet. If you're going to take something massive down, you would typically go for the lower end to knock it down. But this statue, its weakest part is its feet, because it's made of the clay and pottery, the iron mixed with the pottery. That's its weakest part. Iron is tough and durable, but we know that clay and pottery isn't. It is very weak, very brittle, very fragile, and hence the blow from this cut stone, which, granted, this is a dream. It was a tactical blow. It was a specific blow to a specific part to have all this devastation happen to the statue. It struck the feet, and what happened? Of course, the statue came crashing down. And it was so devastating that all the materials were crushed and turned to dust. And it's saying it was all at the same time. I believe that was in verse 35, yes. That it all happened at the same time. I work in the metal industry. I've never seen metal crushed so violently it's turned to dust and could be blown away. I've seen it machined, it didn't get blown away. I've seen it stamped in stamping presses, it just changed shape, it didn't get blown away. I've been in Arkansas and I've been by some granaries where they're doing some granary work, and I see the little chaff that's left over get blown away. But I've never seen that happen to steel. And for this large, massive, awesome-looking statue made out of gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay to be crushed so violently that the metals blew completely away. There was nothing left of it. And then what happened to the stone that struck it? I mean, that had to be a pretty strong stone to strike something that hard and still stay intact. I mean, we can see things, in the wild. If anybody see a deer car hit, you see a deer hit a car gets damaged, the deer gets damaged. You see other things happen. One thing that does the hitting gets damaged as well as what got hit. But we don't hear anything happening to this stone as far as damage happening to it. This stone that struck the statue turns into a great mountain. It gets bigger. It gets more powerful. And what does it do? It fills the whole earth. So this stone that struck this awesome, large, massive statue out of these metals now becomes a great mountain. And the significance of that we will see again to be determined in the interpretation of what this is. And remember, Daniel is telling Nebuchadnezzar what his dream was. And this is what Nebuchadnezzar wants. Tell me my dream and tell me my interpretation. So Nebuchadnezzar's not hearing anything new here. He knows what he dreamed. He's hearing it again. But he's hearing it from somebody that he didn't tell it to, and he's getting the detail that he knew. Nebuchadnezzar is hearing nothing new, but he's hearing all the detail. And some of this could really be sitting in Nebuchadnezzar's mind in certain areas like the stone. Here's a young man, mid-30s, in power, one of the powerful nations at the time back then, and he hears a stone that's being cut out without hands. That's got to tell him that it's some divine power that is behind this stone that's working. And this stone that was cut out by some divine power is strong enough to destroy this large statue. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar is familiar with statues. He's familiar with the gold and the strength of these statues, and he's familiar with that. And it could destroy it so violently and make it into nothing. And then this stone grew into something large and massive that really had to be playing on Nebuchadnezzar's mind as well as, okay, I hear what you're saying, but like kind of looking ahead, I'm a powerful person, but this stone is much more powerful for me, and look what it grew into. Or is Nebuchadnezzar thinking, I'm that stone. I'm going to be one of the more powerful things. So if we could get into his brain and see what his mindset is, it'd be interesting to think, what is Nebuchadnezzar thinking as he's listening to what his dream is being said? Any comments? You folks are quiet this morning. Don't like that. I like talk. No, I didn't bring enough pages today, so you need to talk. I actually brought more than last time when I got home. I was telling Sherry, I says, well, I didn't even do half my lessons, so I ain't got to bring any more next time. But I did. Any comments about this dream? What you might think this dream means? Yes?
Well, I don't think he thinks he was a stone.
I don't think he thinks
Otherwise,
this
he
is,
wouldn't worry.
right?
He would lose his sleep.
Do you think he would be as powerful as a stone? Or the stone's coming after him? I mean, I think you're hitting it on the head because he's worried about this. He's worried about this dream. Absolutely is. Terry.
Without going any further into it, he didn't want to accept any interpretations of his regular guys about the dream because they couldn't tell him what the dream was. But when Daniel tells him exactly what the dream was, that means that Daniel could give him the interpretation with credibility. Because there was no way, you already said this, but there's no way that anybody would have figured out that this was the dream on their own. So because
Absolutely.
he knew the dream, the king knows that Daniel can be trusted to have a good interpretation of it. And in effect, he's realizing, and says, by the way, that this is from God. He knows that Daniel didn't make that up on his own. He knows that Daniel got that from God.
And this could be one of the reasons why Nebuchadnezzar wanted whoever's going to interpret the dream to tell him what the dream was. Because if we all heard the dream, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 20 of us will come up with 20 different interpretations of what that dream was. We can get into groups of 4 or 5 and say, hey, this is what the dream means. Let's go tell him, and he'll believe us because we're smarter than that group over there. I mean, that could very well be one of the reasons he did that. Yes, Ted?
I think more importantly, we're speculating.
Absolutely.
I think more importantly is, we know he didn't know what it means. Because at the end of the book, after Daniel's done all this writing for all of his life, he asks and he begs. I'm trying not to.
No.
He begs and he asks God, what's going on? I don't know what any of this means. And God says, it's not time for you to know. Close the book, you're done.
I'm not.
Daniel doesn't know. Nebuchadnezzar
Yeah.
doesn't know.
I'm not trying to imply that Nebuchadnezzar knows the dream. That's
That is the important part,
yes.
is that they don't know.
The only people know at that point in time of what the interpretation of the dream is God and what God told to Daniel. And everybody else is like has no idea and they're speculating. It'd be fly on the wall interesting to know what any of the wise men from Nebuchadnezzar are thinking about this, because word had to get around that Daniel went in there. I mean, just one of me thinking, a little more of the story is, what are these people thinking? Are they thinking, Daniel's going to lose his life over this because we didn't know, he don't know? Or exactly. That could very well be too.
But Daniel knows that it's kingdoms and that there's a rock, but he doesn't know what any of that stands for.
You're saying Daniel doesn't know.
Daniel doesn't know it either.
He's not to reduce what Daniel is strictly a mouthpiece at this point.
He's only speaking what God tells him. God's not telling him the whole story.
He's telling them what the dream is, not what the dream means. I should say what the interpretation is, but not what the interpretation means. Great comments. Anything else? And if you have a comment after, we can go back to it. I'm not afraid to go back. Now the interpretation of the dream. All this build-up from chapter 1 to chapter 2 and verse 36 is building up to Daniel to get to the point where he's at, the king having a dream, to finally finding out what the interpretation of this dream is. Daniel chapter 2 will go from 36 to 45. This was the dream. Now we should tell it in its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are King of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand, and has caused you to rule over them. You are the head of gold. After you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks into pieces, it will crush and break all these pieces. And in that you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, and they will combine with one another in seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it itself will endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what it will take place in the future, so the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. Wow. An 18-year-old boy telling a 35-year-old man all this information. If it was me, I'd fall back in my chair and like, okay, what does that mean? A lot of information there. It's interesting when Daniel starts off talking about this, he doesn't go right into, here's what it means. I told you the dream, now here's what it means. He takes time to say, that was the dream. Now we will tell us the interpretation before the king. There's no record of anybody else there with Daniel. There very well could be. Who do you think the we is? God. Because from the beginning, Daniel stayed faithful to God. Daniel, when he wanted to, he asked Nebuchadnezzar for time so he could tell him the dream. He prayed to God. And when he came to Nebuchadnezzar, God has given me this. So he is there, and he is just speaking for God at this point. And it's interesting that he approaches it that way, but that's the way Daniel did everything that we've read so far. He's always put God at the forefront. He never took credit for anything from God. I'm sorry, he never took credit for anything for himself. He gave God all the credit. And Daniel, in doing this, is showing his humility and his servitude to God by giving God the credit that we're telling you what this interpretation is. And at that time, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the ruler in that area, and nobody had more power than Nebuchadnezzar as a physical person. And Daniel used the phrase, King of Kings. We've heard that before being spoken of God and of Jesus, but we hear in Ezekiel chapter 26, verse 7, for the Lord God says, behold, I am going to bring upon Tyre from the north Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings, with horses, chariots, cavalry, and a great army. This is when they wiped out the city up there. So it's also been said of Nebuchadnezzar that he's king of kings, but that's just king of kings of the nations at that time. It has nothing to do with anything far greater than that. It's just of the kings that were on the earth at that time, he was the king of kings because the way he was ruling, the way he was vicious and taking over other nations, that's why he was labeled as king of kings. But Daniel went on to say at the end of verse 37, it's the God of heavens has given you this. You didn't get it on your own. So don't be all puffed up here, Nebuchadnezzar. You didn't get this on your own. God has given you this. And that could be a little bit of blow for a guy that thinks he has all this power, he's so strong and mighty, that what's happening was given to him, this rule that he has was given to him by God. So Verse 38, Nebuchadnezzar was ruling because he got the power from God, and it said that you, Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold is you. And that was representing the Babylonian Empire at the time, which Nebuchadnezzar ruled over. So the statue, the head, the gold, we're seeing as being called Nebuchadnezzar. And the metals represent, as we go through the rest of the interpretation, different kingdoms that are outlined through the history here. And we'll see how far it goes down from the head to the foot of the statue of what these various kingdoms mean. But right now we know that the head of gold in verse 38 is Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian empire. Verse 39, it says, and after yours, so after Nebuchadnezzar's reign, so that's telling him right there, there's going to be an end to you and your reign. Doesn't say when, but there's going to be an end to it. A kingdom inferior to yours will rise. Got to make you feel good a little bit. Even though my kingdom's going to end, there's going to be one coming, but it's not going to be quite as good as mine. And that one, the next king that, as we go through history and read, is the Medo-Persian Empire. And this on the statue represents the chest and arms made of silver. And the Medo-Persians were under Cyrus. They were the next kingdom that came into play after the Babylonians. And they had a larger territory, landscape that they had over than what the Babylonians did. And it lasted longer than the Babylonians did, but it wasn't as great. You would think if somebody that lasted longer and had a larger territory would be greater. But some of the reasons that the Medes and the Persians weren't as great of an empire is they were morally inferior, they were less influential, so they didn't have the power of influence over other nations and other kings. They lacked unity in their kingdom, and the king of the Medes and the Persians had less power than Nebuchadnezzar. You might have more territory, you might have lasted longer, but you weren't as powerful as what Nebuchadnezzar was. So we see as we're going down the statue, the chest and the arms of silver, and as Daniel's explaining this interpretation of the dream of what these nations are coming after that. And the next one was the Medes and the Persians of silver, but they're less influential and less powerful than the kingdom of what Nebuchadnezzar is, the Babylonians. Any questions, comments? I see Ted over there digging through, looking. That means no. At the end of 39, it says, then after the second, then a third kingdom of bronze. So we're going down the statue again of what all these means, which will rule over all the earth. So we see the statue of bronze, and as we see through time, through the historians and that, who came after the Medes and Persians was the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great. I wrote them down. If there's any teachers here, I'm sorry. Any teachers listening, I'm sorry. I'm not a history buff. Dates don't mean a lot to me. But I got the dates here if you'd like them. I could read them to you if you want them. I got the dates, but that's not my cup of tea. Sorry. But it does play an important role. I did go through them and check, okay, yes, the historians say this. I went through the commentaries for Daniel and that, and they're lining up well of what it's saying. So, but the next empire, which was the bronze, was the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, and his kingdom stretched from, I guess I'll say it, 331 to 31 BC, and we know that the Babylonians was roughly in the Iran area, but the Greeks went all the way over down into India. Their empire stretched out that far. And after Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, now I'm starting to spew dates, his generals split up his kingdom, which is very interesting. Because remember, now this is the third kingdom that we're talking about, and the Greek Empire. But after Alexander died, the general Antipater ruled over the Macedonian Greece. Lysimus governed Asia Minor. Seleucus ruled Asia, and Ptolemy ruled over Egypt, Palestine, and Cyrenia. Who? Oh, the P is silent? Okay. See, not a historian guy. Ptolemy. Let me just cross that little P out there, because if it ain't spelled the way it sounds, I'll never get it right. Thanks. I took that in school. Hooked on phonics. So, thank you. But so the Greek Empire was split up at the end there, and the generals took it into four other rules, and the Greek Empire at that point, you know, because when you get split like that, the rulers have less power, they have less control, they're less forceful at that point. Now we go on to verse 40, as Daniel says, and then there will be a fourth kingdom. So we've gone from the head to the breast and arms to the belly and the legs of bronze, and now we're into the legs made of iron, the fourth kingdom. And it's as strong as iron, and as the iron crust, I'm reading verse 40, it shatters all things, so like iron that breaks into pieces, it will crush and break these things into pieces. Yes, gold is a precious metal. Yes, silver is. Iron's not precious, but it is stronger than all of those. I mean, how many has had your ring crushed? I mean, it's soft. It scratches you. Silver's the same way. I mean, you think, well, why do they make coins out of silver? Well, it's mixed with other things. Buildings, what do they build buildings out of? They don't do it out of gold or silver, bronze. They're using iron. It's strong. It's durable. It lasts. And this fourth kingdom is a strong kingdom. And this fourth kingdom, who do you think is the next stronger after somebody like the Greece that's going to happen at this point? Romans. And how did they rule? Were they nice and easy on everybody? Soft? Ruled with an iron fist. Tough, like iron. So I think an iron's a good description of what the Roman Empire was. They were rigid, durable. It was their way or the highway. That's kind of like how iron is when you work with it. It's very unforgiving. It's not easy to be around. If you work with it, if you heat it, it's dirty, it's nasty, it stinks, it smells, it's dusty. The Roman Empire, mean, dirty, nasty. It was their way. I mean, it's got to me, I can see the relationship of why they would be called, iron would be related to the Roman Empire, of how the two are very similar. And that fourth empire is the Roman Empire, and how they ruled from that point on. So we got the four parts of the statue that was talked about as far as the metals like that. And then in verses 41 and 42, Daniel's given a more thorough explanation of that fourth kingdom. And he relates the later phase of this kingdom as an outgrowth of that kingdom. How the Roman Empire, as it regressed, it turned into something else. So as that statue went down, it regressed. It went from iron down to that clay or pottery. It became softer. It became more brittle. It became useless. And the feet were made of part iron and part clay, which something you think would need to be strong and rigid was holding up the statue. It wasn't. And the feet and clay represented that fourth kingdom. And that kingdom would be divided, hence the two types of materials it was made out of, the iron and the clay and pottery. And at this point in our reading, we see a lot of Daniel's prophecies in the Old Testament have been fulfilled, of what was happening into the rulers there and the nations there. But we get into the next part of his interpretation here, there's going to be part of what Daniel's saying has not been fulfilled of the interpretation of this dream. Any questions or comments?
Just the fact that you're giving more than Daniel does, so the question is,
Because I read on.
what, yeah, but what did, I want everybody to make sure they know, but what did Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel know at this point?
True,
They didn't know most of what you just said,
true.
and that's the most important thing to remember. They didn't know, it's almost like when, the Ethiopian, stopped in, or Philip stopped to help the Ethiopian. To us, what he was looking at in Isaiah was easy for us to understand, but him, he didn't know because it had just happened in the interpretation of what was being talked about didn't apply to what had happened in history and what had happened with Jesus coming. They don't
Yes.
know this.
Yes, that's where, kind of like Paul Harvey, I'm giving the rest of the story before the initial part of it. Thank you for correcting me on that.
They don't even know, Daniel doesn't even know himself by the end of the book what all this stuff stands for.
That is correct. Yeah, he's just saying the meaning of it, not what the entire meaning of it.
The only reason we know, or should know, is a lot of the world nowadays still
That's-
misinterprets what Daniel said. The only reason that we should know, and hopefully here we do know, is because we can read the rest of the book all the way to the end.
And you mean book the rest of the Bible, not the book of Daniel. Yeah, the New Testament is filling in where I'm getting a lot of my information as well. Absolutely. Were you going to say something, Terry? You had your hand halfway up.
I think I was just stretching.
Oh,
It's one of the miraculous things we keep talking about here, about how the Bible was written, and how could anybody have known this? Even with Daniel's interpretation of that dream, how can anybody have known what was going to really happen by the time Jesus came?
correct.
Except for
Bec-
whoever wrote this.
I mean, because when Jesus came, it was people weren't accepting it then either. You know, the Pharisees and all that, they weren't accepting that. Thank you, Ted.
Yeah.
Stretching?
Building on a little bit on what he said, we always like to have more detail. We wish the Bible would fill in the blanks. But the purpose of Daniel talking to Nebuchadnezzar was to explain the dream to what Nebuchadnezzar could understand as being important. It wasn't important how many years the Medes and the Persians were there, or even who the Medes and the Persians were, or the Greeks, or the people in Rome, which was so far away from Babylon, they probably didn't even know then it existed. That
Right.
wasn't important. And so they don't go into those details. Daniel didn't, and God didn't
No.
to Daniel, because that was not what was important.
Correct.
Actually, I think to Nebuchadnezzar, one of the most important things was back in verse 39. After you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. That's saying that the Babylonian kingdom is not going to be forever. That Nebuchadnezzar's descendants are not always going to be in power.
Right.
That his entire structure of his country is going to go away. If there would be anything that would hit Nebuchadnezzar upside the head,
Should be that.
it would be the first part of verse 39, you know? And that whatever happens later on, like 500 years later, is a whole different world.
But this is all part of his dream. Yes.
To go a little bit farther than Terry did, to try to drive my point home one more time. Because this is more, we don't see it this way because we know the end of the story. Why then was this particular incident picked out from all the things that happened to Daniel over 90 years? And this one's written, and Daniel only knows up to a certain point. Why is it written that way? To whose benefit actually is it? To ours.
Oh, it's ours. Yeah, I mean,
That's what the Old Testament, or that's what the New Testament writers say about the Old Testament. It was written for our understanding.
Bill?
I was just gonna say, it speaks to inspiration to be able to give it the way that Nebuchadnezzar needed to have, but yet still in the same way, have more meaning for us. I mean, that, humans just couldn't do that.
No.
I mean, there's no way that can happen by chance, and so, his argument about Nebuchadnezzar,
Right on.
absolutely. His argument about for us, absolutely. It just shows, like Ted said, what an amazing story it is.
And if that doesn't send shudders up and down your back, you're not reading the Bible close enough.
Oh, wait a minute, maybe it's the snow.
Any other comment?
You can't catch a break in this congregation. No.
Hey, you would let me slide.
We're going to stop there for today and let those two argue over there on the, oh, we got one more, Mark.
You know, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here. Do you think there's any connection with the dream and the statue that he made on the planet Earth? And, you know, he made a statue rather than being mixed metals or anything. It was
It was all of gold. Yeah, that, we'll see that in chapter 3.
Yeah, but I wonder if there's some kind of connection between that statue that he made.
He hasn't studied that far into that, so.
You know,
We'll talk about that in chapter 3. I mean, because that starts off in verse 3. I mean, verse 1 is the king made a image of gold right there. So we're
I wonder if that's connected to
5 verses away. It could very well be, but we'll see when we get there. But think about it. This dream being interpreted to him, and then like Terry said, the head of that statue of his dream is his kingdom that's going to end.
Right.
So
I mean, if he made it out of gold, maybe that's his way of saying, well, the Babylonian kingdom is going to last forever.
That's his whole point. It wasn't.
it wasn't.
But maybe he wanted it, I'm sure he wanted it to last.
Oh, I'm sure he did too.
And at this point, notice that they don't even dwell on what that rock is.
No, they said a rock
This is the most important part.
not cut by hand, and then they moved on. And then we only hear it about again in the interpretation about that rock. And then we moved on.
You should, as a people studying the story, understand this rock that Moses struck way back, because now we've got a series, not a theme of rocks
Rocks.
going on that are important in the Old Testament also.
And then we see the rock in the New Testament. Same thing. Anything else? That's all for today. We'll finish chapter 2 next week. We only got a few to go.